Hi, my name's Joe. I'm an alcoholic. How's everybody tonight? You guys are more enthusiastic than me. That's good. Who's here at Position of Neutrality for the very first time? Anybody? One or two of you? Good. First of all, welcome. Second, let me warn you in advance, you're liable to experience us just a little different than other meetings of other fellowships you may have attended. The primary reason that's liable to happen is that we intend for you to have a different experience here. What we do, we've been doing for a lot of years, we take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book, and we use this book in Crystal Meth Anonymous. Why? The process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work with addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. So what we do here is really a sharing, not so much a teaching. I'll show you how I find my experience in the book. I'll encourage you to have your experience with the book. And if we both do our job, we will share a spiritual experience in this room tonight. Any of you been here before can witness for these folks that happen. So in 12-step recovery, when we speak of a spiritual experience, we're not talking of something conceptual, we're talking to you of something sensory. You will feel it. When you do, I'll know, and I'll call it to your attention. Because we would cheat you to talk to you about the power we call God without giving you a demonstration of that power. Fair enough? Yeah. Okay, so tonight we're in the fitness step, the freedom step. Who wants to get free? Cool. All right, so we're in steps 8 and 9, and that starts in page 76 of the book, about the middle of the page, those of you following along with the book. I encourage everyone that wants to follow along with their book, because it's a terrible idea to let someone else read your book for you. Because it's a book of experience. Not because it's a rule, it's just, if you don't find your experience in it, then you'll have someone else doing your thinking for you. We don't want that to happen. Okay, now we need more action, without which we find that faith without works is dead. Does anyone recognize that from another book? Yes. Okay, it's not by accident they put it there. Those guys spent a lot of time studying that other book, and particularly that book of James where that quote comes from. Do you understand why, for alcoholics, half of which were atheists or agnostics to begin with, why this particular statement is so important? Because regardless of theology, faith without works is dead for the alcoholic, because I have to prove the power to me through me, because I'm a doubter by nature. Does that make sense? Yes. And they want to remind me of that before I start in step 9, because that is where I start taking the assault on my ego, to reduce my ego and grow in the Spirit. Right? Admitting promptly when you're wrong isn't going to happen until I learn to admit reluctantly when I'm wrong. Got it? Okay. All right, so let's look at steps 8 and 9. We have a list of all the persons we have harmed and to whom we are willing to make amends. Where did we get such a list? Step 4. So those of you that have made a inventory, have you got from that, those people you harmed, how you harmed them, got some kind of a plan? That's the point, right? Okay. And then it said, we made it when we took inventory. Why do I call that to your attention? Because rarely have we seen a person fail who's thoroughly followed our path. It would help to, if we see what their path is and what they experienced along the way, not only are we going to grow in the Spirit when they describe the sensory experiences, but we're going to be able to check ourselves in our worldly ways, what we're doing aligning with theirs. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so we subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. When did they do that? When they did a searching and fearless moral inventory, right? Yeah. So we just got through the 4th step. We subjected ourselves to a drastic self-appraisal. How many of you have done a 4th step at least once? Did you find it drastic? Okay, fair enough. All right. And now we go out to the past and repair the damage done, or go out to our fellows and repair the damage done in the past. We attempt to sweep away the debris which is accumulated out of our effort to live on self-will and run the show ourselves. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. So they're telling you clearly that willingness is divine power. If you lack willingness, it isn't somebody going to beat it into you. You're going to have to ask God for it. How many of you knew you needed to do something, still weren't too good about this word we call God, but finally just somewhere inside yourself, I really need to do this, and found yourself doing it? What changed? Why that day? So what we're doing is we're learning the tangible reality. Willingness came when I summoned it, even though my belief was fleeting at best. Yes? Okay. All right, so remember it was agreed at the beginning that we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. They put it in italics, so I guess we should study that phrase. They're reminding me to remind myself that I'm going to any lengths for victory over alcohol. Is that what we're doing now? Remember when I asked you guys how many are here just resting? And everybody gets a laugh? The authors always want, are you here just resting? Or do you want to grow? Does it make sense? Because this is the spooky stuff. This, yeah? Okay. All right. So probably there are still some misgivings. Any of you have any misgivings? Then they tell you what the misgivings look like. As we look over the list of business acquaintances and friends we have hurt, we may feel diffident about going to some of them on a spiritual basis. So how many of you, regardless of your belief, based on the interactions you had with other people, felt a little uncomfortable going to them on a spiritual basis? So it said, let us be reassured. To some people we need not and probably should not emphasize the spiritual feature on our first approach. So now what are they telling me? There's going to be more than one approach. They're going to have plenty of opportunities to observe the changed nature. I don't tell them how that nature was changed until they ask. Does that make sense? Okay. So, and the reason is, they give us the reason, we might prejudice them. At the moment we're trying to put our lives in order, but this is not an end in itself. Our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. So now they're telling us clearly that this step of our development is the fitness step. How many of you have made an effort to get physically fit at some time in your life? Did you notice that you didn't really feel fit when you made the commitment to go get fit? And that you went and you started doing exercises, perhaps changed your diet, and eventually, even before you looked fit, you felt fitter? Okay, well, spiritual fitness is the same thing. The weights we lift are egoic. I'm going to have to go take ownership of my past bad acts. Does that make sense? Okay. So it's seldom wise to approach an individual who still smarts from our injustice to him and announce that we've gone religious. In the prize ring, this would be called leading with the chin. And then they tell you about their thoughts about it. Why lay ourselves open to being branded fanatics or religious bores? How many of you wouldn't have used those words, but you think, man, the way I treated these people, I can't go out there talking to them about God. Been out there looking for God, sure sorry about your stereo. Right? They don't really want to hear that from me. We may kill a future opportunity to carry a beneficial message. So sometimes the information we're receiving in the Spirit is correct, and it's telling me, wait a minute, your approach should be based on just facts. Does it make sense? Instead of some spiritual thing I'm describing, let them discover the Spirit, and then I'll give God the credit. Okay. So, but our man is sure to be impressed with the sincere desire to set right the wrong. So what's the sincere desire to set right the wrong as demonstrated for another? I'd show up with something and a plan for something more and a request from them if there's any more I can do to make it right, right? Okay. And I got that from my inventory, right? Okay. So he's going to be more interested in a demonstration of goodwill than in our talk of spiritual discoveries, for the reasons I just said. They're already skeptical. How many of you have met people that get into recovery and then they go real religious right away, and they almost go religious crazy, and you're not real... No one's ever met religious crazy? They're crazy, man. Okay. So then we don't have credibility to understand. So they're talking, if you really want to grow in the Spirit, again, we are the light of the world by a certain teaching. The light doesn't need an announcement. It's self-evident. Okay. All right, so we don't use this as an excuse for shying away from the subject of God. When it will serve any good purpose, we're willing to announce our convictions with tact and common sense. So when would I know that it served a good purpose? The rule of thumb is when they ask. Make sense? If they don't ask, then I just keep demonstrating changed behavior until they ask how that occurred. Right? Okay. And then I honor the third step. Make sense? Whatever third step you said. I agreed in my third step that if he'd take away my difficulties, I'd give him the credit. Okay. All right, so the question of how to approach the man we hated will arise. How many of you have had that question come up? How many of you don't like the word hate, so you're kind of... Okay, it means strongly dislike. Usually we have more once we know what it means. Okay. How many of you, when you did an inventory, you said, I'm not mad at anyone, I'm just mad at me? I've heard all that. I've heard it 100 times. Say, okay, so we won't do resentments with you. Let's do relationships. We'll work our way back to resentment. Right? Okay. All right. It may be that he's done us more harm than we've done him, and though we may have acquired a better attitude toward him, we're still not too keen about admitting our faults. How many of you have had that? I did treat him bad, but it was only because he is a son of a bitch. I'm suffering from my thoughts, not from that act. So it's really enlightened self-interest that I make my approach, take ownership of my past bad acts, and get free. Does it make sense? Okay. Nevertheless, with a person we dislike, we take the bit in our teeth. Anyone understand that metaphor? Yeah, if the horse or the animal, whatever animal that you've got that's pulling a plow or a wagon gets the bit in the teeth, you're going where the horse wants to go. The horse is now in control of the situation. So what they're suggesting is we take control of the situation. We initiate the approach. Okay? It's harder to go to an enemy than to a friend, but we find it much more beneficial to us. Now, I've heard people over the years spin that in. You got to go to the toughest one first. Don't listen to the drunk in the room. Listen to the drunk in the book. They're acknowledging that that's the hardest one to do, and you're going to benefit from it greater, but you'd be better off to get a circle of support around you. Do what you will do to the wife, to the family, to the employer. Get those people around you to support, and when it's time to amend a behavior, that will be evident to you. How many of you have been around long enough you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Like you know it needs to be done, and all of a sudden an opportunity appears. Okay. All right, so we go to him in a helpful and forgiving spirit, confessing our former ill feeling and expressing our regret. So you got to break that down. How many of you have gone to make an amends, and then it went badly, and you ended up having to make amends for the amends you tried to make? Because we don't take the time to get centered in the spirit, in a forgiving spirit. I've got to think about how I'd like to be approached if the roles were reversed, and then proceed accordingly. Setting aside the harms that have been done. Yeah? Okay. That will take a power greater than me. And that's how I'll grow in consciousness of the power within me to be kinder than I feel like being. Because my mind will desperately want to lash out, but the Spirit will empower me if I ask to be calm. Any of you had that experience? Yes. Any of you started on your amends and were frightened of some of them? Yes. How many of you felt less so on the other side? Felt fear all the way through, and then you got to the other side and you felt some freedom? Yes. Yeah. Courage comes, the experience of courage is an observable thing. It comes on the other side of confronting fear. So everyone goes, why? That was brave, Joe. You're like, it didn't feel brave. You got what I'm saying? Okay, all right. So under no condition do we criticize such a person or argue. How'd they learn that? That's how you get to go make a new approach for the approach you tried to make. If they're not centered in the Spirit, we're liable to criticize them. Anyone ever you ask them, what can I do to make it right? And they told you something you didn't think was quite... Or you tried to spin it a little bit and they took your spin. Simply we tell them that we'll never get over drinking until we've done our utmost to straighten out the past. Do you believe that? Yeah. They'll know it because they'll feel you if you know that. Does that make sense? If I don't get fit, if I don't get over this egoic idea of me and my resentment of you, I will drink again. It's just a matter of time. Okay. We are there to sweep off our side of the street, realizing that nothing worthwhile can be accomplished until we do so, never trying to tell him what he should do. His faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. Did you notice how many times they said the same thing in various ways? How many lessons of doing it wrong do you think they got to say that many times? Sometimes I've heard people talk about this stuff like it's rules. It's not rules. It's suggestive. It's only going to work for you if you honestly want to and you're willing to make the effort. You're going to make mistakes, and that is your right. That's why I got a step to admit promptly I'm wrong and go the other fucking way. Right? Okay. But I might want to do it right because they've got a promise here. If our manner is calm, frank, and open, we will be gratified with the result. So, promise and condition. What was the condition? My manner has got to be calm, frank, and open. How many of you, when you went to make amends, did not feel calm, but apparently appeared calm?
Yes.
What was that but a power greater than you operating through you? Does it make sense what we're talking about? This AA's approach to revealing to you the power within you is the logical approach. It's more logical to believe than not to believe based on our experience if we can just be honest with ourselves. So if you've had this experience, regardless of your religious ideas, we're now working on relationship, not religion. Does that make sense? Okay. So, how many of you went to them and were calm, frank, and open and were not gratified with the result? Okay. So, were you open to timing other than your own? Okay. So, you weren't. But usually if the promise doesn't come through, it's because I'm lying to me, not, do you understand what I'm saying? I don't mean to blow you out, but that's what we thought. Just threw her right under the bus, didn't I? Okay, in 9 cases out of 10, the unexpected happens. How many? 90%. So all that worrying I did all the way there, 90% of the time, none of that shit's going to happen. Okay. Sometimes a man we're calling upon admits his own fault, so feuds of years standing melt away in an hour. Rarely do we fail to make satisfactory progress. Every time I see the word rarely in this book, I'm reminded of all the times over the years I've been told what rarely means. What I would suggest to you is that rarely means rarely. Don't make it any more complicated than it is. Typically, what I lack is perspective, not promise. Sometimes I'm a guy that wants it right now. I don't know if any of you can relate. And sometimes I don't get what I want right now, but I've planted seeds for what I'm hoping for. Okay. Okay, so our former enemies sometimes praise what we're doing and wish us well, and occasionally they will offer assistance. It should not matter, however, if someone does throw us out of his office. We've made our demonstration, done our part, it's water over the dam. Why did I go there? For their reaction or my fitness? And we'll probably have to remind ourselves of that if it doesn't go well. Right? Because the attack will come on. But the fact is, you already lifted the weights. That's what you went for. You didn't go for any other particular reason. If the relationship blossoms, great. But if not, I took ownership of mine. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay. So then we go into a little bit of a description of most alcoholics. It says most alcoholics owe money. Now, with the exception of Donald, who's here tonight, I've never met one who didn't. Any of you guys ever owe any money?
Lots of it.
We do not dodge our creditors. Telling them what we're trying to do, we make no bones about our drinking. They usually know it anyway, whether we think so or not. How many of you discovered that? Thought your addiction was a big secret. And when you finally admitted it, you made it unanimous? Did that happen to you too? Yeah, our creditors often know something's wrong. Sometimes they're relieved that it was just addiction because they thought we were really nuts, huh? Okay, so nor are we afraid of disclosing our alcoholism on the theory that it may cause financial harm. Don't misread that either. If I didn't harm someone as a result of my addiction, I owe them no explanation about my addiction. And if you go around telling everybody you meet of your addiction, it will cause financial harm. So if I harmed them because of my addiction, I owe them the explanation that not only did I do that, but I know I did that. And I owe them that for their freedom and mine. But don't get it twisted. Does that make sense? People don't have to understand alcoholics, and in fact they don't. And so it's a really good idea, if I didn't harm them because of my alcoholism, I just leave that alcoholism thing out. Yeah. Okay. All right. So Approached in this way, the most ruthless creditor will sometimes surprise us. Arranging the best deal we can, we let these people know we're sorry. So how might I let them know I'm sorry? Changed behavior for me was an admission that not only was I wrong, but they did not deserve to be treated that way, and that I was there to set it right to their specification, not mine. All of the, you make sense? I don't know. Okay, so then it goes through their explanation. Our drinking has made us slow to pay. We must lose our fear of creditors no matter how far we have to go if we're liable to drink if we're afraid to face them. How many of you have found yourself in financial fear in recovery and understand that they're talking about something real? And they tell us in these 9-step promises that fear of economic insecurity will leave us. Do you know how that happens? When does fear go away? When I confront it, which means I'll probably walk through some economic insecurity in order to outgrow fear of economic insecurity. How am I going to know my needs are met anyway unless I walk in that faith? How many of you have known there was no way for this shit to turn out and walked right through it and somehow it turned out, and then the next time there's no way for it to turn out, I'm right back where I was before? Now do you see why faith without works is dead for the alcoholic? Because all that stuff's been done. I did it in blind blackouts. Drove multiple states. Who does that shit? Arrived unscathed. And I'm worried about a bill. Somebody else had the same experience. All right. So perhaps we've committed a criminal offense. Perhaps. Some of you, I know you have. I've seen your number. And it says committed, not convicted. So be too quick to throw them under the bus. Okay. Which might land us in jail if it were known to the authorities. We may be short in our accounts and unable to make good. We've already admitted this in confidence to another person, but we're sure we'd be in prison or lose our job if it were known. There's people in this room tonight that have faced this. Jeff's here tonight. He came in here. He was right out of detox, started chairing this meeting, went through a trial, went to his sentencing. He went and did 5 years inside, and he came back here when he got out and started chairing the meeting again. That's what any links might look like. Jeff, I always do that to you. Sorry, buddy, but it's a big deal. And people need to know we really do things like that. Okay? And while he was there, he carried the message of AA. Okay. All right, so maybe it's only a petty offense, such as padding the expense account. Many of us have done that sort of thing. Maybe we're divorced and remarried, but haven't kept up the alimony number 1. She's indignant about it and has a warrant out for our arrest. That's a common form of trouble, too. So what you want to focus on, a lot of us get here and we're looking at, oh, that didn't happen to me, that didn't happen to me. That's our nature, right? But don't let your mind steal from you a better version of you. Find where the similarities are, not the differences. And so they're going to tell us, although these reparations take innumerable forms, so as many of you as are here, even the same problem will be perceived differently. So you're going to have to individually go inward and find out what this looks like for you. Does that make sense? Okay, what we're learning here, guys, is eyesight without insight is spiritual blindness. So we've got to, every time we're disturbed, go inward and find out what's disturbing me, because the world's simply reflecting it. Does that make sense? Okay. So there are some general principles which we find guiding, reminding ourselves that we've decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. So did you know that's what you're really after? Freedom from alcohol is a byproduct of the spiritual experience I went seeking. What I'm really looking for is inebriation of the spirit, and what it will appear to the world is abstinence. Does that make sense? How many of you have been working with somebody and felt the flow of the spirit and literally felt a buzz? And then you went back and you thought you could produce it on your own and you couldn't? That's how we learn the reality. Okay. All right, so we ask that we be given strength and direction to do the right thing. So now you got to start seeing the all-inclusive nature of the step. I remind myself what my commitment was, and then I immediately go asking. So I fully concede to my innermost self, right? Always the same thing. Back in the experience, I got to go get power. I lack power. I'm afraid. Does that make sense? Okay. No matter what the personal consequences may be, we may lose our position or reputation or face jail, but we are willing. Can you see how my willingness to face jail or lose my reputation would start to push down on my ego and allow me to become a more authentic version of me? Okay. So we must not shrink at anything. Usually, however, other people are involved. So now they're going to tell us about that mysterious others. Where is it? It'll help them or others. And I've heard people pontificate that you are others. And I suggest to you, no, you're you. You got to call them. Others, they got another column. Don't get it twisted. Okay? So we're going to tell you who the other people are, right? Therefore, we're not to be the hasty and foolish martyr who would needlessly sacrifice others to save himself from the alcoholic pit. A man we know had remarried because of resentment and drinking. He had not paid alimony to his first wife. She was furious. She went to court and got an order for his arrest. He had commenced our way of life. What's that mean? We don't talk about it very clearly in the modern fellowship. We should do a better job. I'm hoping people in here will do a better job. This is a manner of living, not a workbook exercise. When I enter into this fellowship and I'm in the program, I enter into the world of the Spirit. And I'm in the fellowship of the Spirit as well as the fellowship of the whole. And so that is a manner of living. Does that make sense? Okay. Had secured a position. What's that sound like? Got him a job. That'd be cool. Might even show up for this one. And was getting his head above water. So he's paying a few bills. You relate to that? Okay. And then it says it would have been impressive heroics if he'd walked up to the judge and said, "Here I am." So, are we about impressive heroics when we're trying to reduce our ego? Nope. So, we got to check that a little bit and see what needs to be done. Because there's others involved. Who are the others involved? Got a new family. Got the family he owes money to. Got a new employer. All of which are depending on him. All of those others would be harmed if he suddenly self-sacrifices. He may have to, but, right? Okay. So we thought he ought to be willing to do that if necessary. So you may have to, but let's see if we can avoid some. But if he were in jail, he could provide nothing for either family. He suggested that he write his first wife admitting his faults and asking forgiveness. He did, and he also sent a small amount of money. He told her what he would try and do in the future. He said he was perfectly willing to go to jail if she insisted. So of those things, what do you imagine was the most impactful for her? It's funny. He sent a bit of money. He asked her forgiveness. He said, "I didn't do any of this to get out of trouble with you. I'm still willing to go to jail if you want me to." He gave her the dignity to forgive him on her terms. Any of you ever kind of demanded forgiveness of somebody and didn't feel all that warm? How many of you have had forgiveness demanded of you? And we grudgingly, but we don't really, do we? We don't unpack. Okay. All right, so of course she did not, and the whole situation has long since been adjusted. Before taking drastic action which might implicate other people, we secure their consent. So who did he have to go secure consent from? The new family, the new employer. In modern fellowship, you may have a commitment at your group. You may need to go tell the group that, might be a minute, right? How many of you guys had to go surrender and leave for a while? A lot of us have had to do that. Okay, so that happens, right? Okay, so if we have obtained permission, have consulted with others, asked God to help, and the drastic step is indicated, we must not shrink. You see how they walked you right through the step experience. So I've asked this power, and you got to know, if you're new to this and you haven't really understood, the power we talk about that we call God presents as power, peace, happiness, and a sense and direction. Tangible power that we've experienced into the beginning of the relationship. And that power enables the decision to go inward and do this searching and fearless look. And then once my eyes are open, I've now asked for power to go out and make right wrongs. So now I should be feeling a flow of the Spirit. I actually am getting that that flow, I really realized what that flow of the Spirit is, and now I know when a drastic step is indicated because I experience palpable fear. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Any of you knew you had to do something, like knew you had to do it, and I don't want to do it. And then it reminds me that I must not shrink. All of this is to improve our consciousness of this great reality within. Not someone else's theology, not because a sponsor told me or the house requires it, because if I'm going to live, I've got to be free of anger. And the only way that's going to happen is to unpack all these thoughts about that situation. Or those fears. Does that make sense? Okay. This brings to mind a story about one of our friends. While drinking, he accepted a sum of money from a bitterly hated business rival, giving him no receipt for it. He subsequently denied having received the money and used the incident as a basis for discrediting the man. He thus used his own wrongdoing as a means of destroying the reputation of another. In fact, his rival was ruined. So I'll give you a little explanation. This guy was an Oxford group member. His name never appears in the book because he never really joined AA. He stayed with the Oxford groups. And he was one of the more religious members. And so apparently what happened is this guy, who he describes as a bitterly hated business rival, had given him money at some point for the church fund. And this cat was drinking at the time. And somehow that money was no longer available for the church fund. I don't know if any of you have ever had the experience of sort of disappearing money entrusted to you. And there was an explanation, but none you cared to give. That's what happened to this cat. But you got to remember, he's one of the more religious people. So now he's troubled. He's lied about this guy, and he's lied to the church about the money, and he doesn't want to tell the story. Any of you ever had a church family, and how many of you stole the AA money? Anyone ever stole the Seventh Tradition money? Ain't that a bitch to go back and own that? We got to go back and own it, right? So you get where this cat's coming from. Okay. He felt that he'd done a wrong that he could not possibly make right. If he opened that old affair, he was afraid it would destroy the reputation of his partner, disgrace his family, and take away his means of livelihood. So all those fears. If I do this, then that'll happen. If I do that, then this will happen. How many of you have had all of those going on and knew if you did not do it, you were going to drink and wipe it all out anyway? Or use that? That's the decision he's facing. Okay? So what right had he to involve those dependent upon him? So immediately I go to my selfless mode. I can't harm them. But when it's time for me to go off, I'm going to harm them. Right? Without any thought. I'm just talking about me. I don't imagine that's ever happened to any of y'all. Right? I mean, I'm going to protect them so I don't tell these people what I really did. And then I'm going to go get high because I can't live with myself. And sure. Okay. Okay. So how could he possibly make a public statement exonerating his rival? So not only that, but how the hell can I do it? You notice how there's a question mark there. This is a textbook, and when they put a question mark, they want you to go inward. Again, eyesight without insight is spiritual blindness. You will not have vision unless you go inward. The questions help you get vision. How could I possibly make right this wrong I did, stealing the church fund? I'd probably have to go to the church to cop to it, wouldn't I? Huh. Interesting, the way that vision just popped into our head. After consulting with his wife and partner, he came to the conclusion that it was better to take those risks than to stand before his Creator guilty of such ruinous slander. So you understand that language, given that he's a religious guy, right? I not only stole and ruined my friend's reputation or my enemy's reputation, but I defrauded the church, and now, you know, I've got to go before God, and I've slandered a brother and stole the money of the church. Any of you ever had a church family and know that that would probably keep us in everlasting damnation? Okay. He saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands, or he'd soon start drinking again and all would be lost anyhow. So now he had an honest thought. How many of you can relate to that? Regardless of the consequence, if I don't do something about this thought storm I'm in, I'm going to have to medicate it somewhere. Okay. He attended church for the first time in many years, and after the sermon, he quietly got up and made an explanation. So he quietly got up and made an explanation. How quiet do you think he felt? His action met widespread approval, and today he's one of the most trusted citizens of his town. This all happened years ago. So what I want you to see is that the thief of the church fund becomes the most trusted citizen of the town through the power that we're introduced here to. Does it make sense? Conversions, when we talk about recovered, a redemption. Not a medical recovery, a mining recovery. To take from what was thought waste and extract something infinitely valuable. Yeah? Okay. All right, so the chances are that we have domestic troubles. Perhaps we're mixed up with women in a fashion we wouldn't care to have advertised. We doubt if in this respect alcoholics are fundamentally much worse than other people, but drinking does complicate sex relations in the home. Any of you ever find that to be true? Was it complicated to even find the right home? Or after a few years with an alcoholic, a wife gets worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative. How many of you noticed that? So by this stage of our development, one of the things we're starting to learn and see is that the world's reflecting how I'm thinking and feeling. It's not causing it. So I really got to get disciplined now, because I don't know whether I'm seeing their worn out, resentful, and uncommunicative nature or mine. My thought. Does it make sense? Okay. So they tell me to go inward. How could she be anything else? They got a chapter to the wives, even if you were never married, or that your spouse happens to be a male. Whatever is happening, it doesn't matter to me what flavor you're into. But the fact of the matter is, you got to find out what it was like to have someone else come home. Have me coming home to them, right? And so it's a perspective shift. Make sense? Okay. So the husband begins to feel lonely, sorry for himself. He commences to look around the nightclubs or their equivalent for something besides liquor. So what is the nightclubs or their equivalent?
Crack house.
Might be the Fellowship Hall or the Studio 164. I'm sure none of you ever had that experience. But the fact is, if I've got a storm going on within me, I think things out there are going to fix it. And I do harm out of desperation. So they're wanting me to start growing an awareness of what's driving me. Does it make sense? Okay, perhaps he's having a secret and exciting affair with the girl who understands. In fairness, we must say that she may understand, but what are we going to do about a thing like that? So inward, we're really not debating their understanding anyway, are we? We're debating how I'm treating people and what I'm going to do about that. Because now I've got two people I'm harming potentially, yes? Yes. Okay. A man so involved often feels very remorseful at times, especially if he's married to a loyal and courageous girl who's literally gone through hell for him. Whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. So what are they telling you? We'll struggle with it in our minds as long as we will, but if we want to unpack, we're going to have to take action. How many of you have learned that? Okay. And that's why the inventory is continuous, because I'm disciplining my thought life, and I'm looking at how am I going to unpack, how am I going to convert this experience, how am I going to make this right. Sometimes there's no way to make it right but to walk through it. Okay. If we're sure our wife does not know, should we tell her? How sure are we? Not always, we think. If she knows in a general way that we've been wild, should we tell her in detail?
No.
Why? How many of you wanted to know in detail and got the detail and wish you didn't get so much detail? So spiritually, it's really not fair, even though they're demanding it, right? It's going to change the focus. Okay. Undoubtedly, we should admit our fault. She may insist on knowing all the particulars. She'll want to know who the woman is and where she is. We feel we ought to say to her that we have no right to involve another person. How many of you have felt you ought to do one thing and then lack the power to do so? So these guys detail that for you too. Okay? So we're sorry for what we've done, and God willing it shall not be repeated. More than that we cannot do. We have no right to go further. That's what they learned was the right position to take. Guess how they found that position? I'm going to read it to you. Though there may be justifiable exceptions. How many of you have had justifiable exceptions? And then took an action based on that justifiable exception, and then found out that the way you should have gone was the first way. Because how are you going to know that, easier and softer ways really do exist, and we think we've spotted them until we find out the obstacles in my path are my path. And they were put there to help me grow. Anyway, though there may be justifiable exceptions, and though we wish to lay down no rule of any sort, we've often found this the best course to take. See, I didn't make all that up. They found that was the best course to take, the first one, by taking the second one. I've done that. Anyone else know what I'm talking about? As soon as she demanded to know who the other person was and where they were, I gave that information up. And immediately, the focus changed from me, who had done the wrong, to the other person who had been wronged by me, same as she had. Now 3 relationships are toast. And all you get to do with it is tell it from the podium. Okay. Our design for living is not a one-way street. It's as good for the wife as for the husband. If we can forget, so can she. And I again would recommend that you let her discover that on her own. Don't point out that forgiveness thing to them. They'll come to it on their own. It's better, however, that one does not needlessly name a person upon whom she can vent jealousy. And so now they're describing to you the experience I just described to you out of my own walk. Perhaps there are some cases where the utmost frankness is demanded. No outsider can appraise such an intimate situation. Who's an outsider? Pretty much everyone, right? This is between me and my Creator and this person I've harmed. And if there's another person involved in the harm, that's a separate harm as far as this one's concerned. Does that make sense? Okay. So it may be that both will decide that the way of good sense and loving kindness is to let bygones be bygones. Each might pray about it, having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. Keep it always in sight that we're dealing with that most terrible human emotion, jealousy. Good generalship may decide that the problem be attacked on the flank rather than risk face-to-face combat. So that metaphor confuses people. All they're saying is none of us, regardless of who we are, how we live, wants to be told we shouldn't think or feel a certain way. Right. We already know we shouldn't think or feel the way we're feeling, but we are powerless not to. So what ends up happening is if people show understanding and compassion and empathy, non-judgment, eventually we recognize what's happening. Have you ever had that happen? Where you're just being shitty for no particular reason, but pretty soon you were pissing you off. That ever happen? God, I suck, right? And then I realized, man, they don't deserve this. But then I came to that conclusion, summoned the power. Does it make sense? Okay. So we want to let them do that. That's what, rather than risk face-to-face combat. If we have no such complication, there is plenty we should do at home. Sometimes we hear an alcoholic say that the only thing he needs to do is keep sober. You guys ever hear that?
Oh, yeah.
We hear it all the time. Does it make sense in light of your experience? I don't know anything about their experience, but if the only thing I needed to do was stay sober, how come I got sober and couldn't stay sober so many damn times? Clearly that's not true for me, right? Okay. So it says, certainly he must keep sober, for there will be no home if he doesn't, but he's yet a long way from making good to the wife or parents whom for years he's so shockingly treated. Passing all understanding is the patience mothers and wives have had with alcoholics. Had this not been so, many of us would have had no homes today, would perhaps be dead. The alcoholic is like a tornado, roaring his way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead. Did you guys notice that? We got a power that resurrects relationships. Tangible power. Does it make sense? Okay. And that process makes you new. Okay. Sweet relationships are dead. Affections have been uprooted. Selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. We feel a man is unthinking when he says that sobriety is enough. Can you see what they're saying? In light of my experience, that's silly. Okay. All right, so he's like the farmer who came out of the cyclone cellar to find his home ruined. To his wife, he remarked, "Don't see anything the matter here, Ma. Ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing?" Yes, there's a long period of reconstruction ahead, and we must take the lead. So there's a reconstruction, a new structure that we're building, that back to the metaphor of 3, and all of these people are stones in that foundation. Everyone I'm encountering is a stone in the foundation of this new creation, this new arch through which I'm walking through freedom. You're starting to see the parallel of all the metaphors now? Okay, so now they're telling us that we must take the lead, and remorseful mumbling that we're sorry won't fill the bill at all. So they're not saying don't say you're sorry, there's nothing wrong with that, but we say we're sorry when we're not sorry. How many of you have walked up to somebody and they were busy with something and you said, sorry to interrupt, but... So clearly I'm not sorry. So that's not going to be good enough to grow spiritually. Does that make sense? Okay. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it, being very careful not to criticize them. Their defects may be glaring, but the chances are that our own actions are partly responsible. So we clean house with the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. That prayer doesn't get a lot of play in the fellowship. I suggest to you, if you're new, take the time to center in the morning and ask to be shown the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. And every time you awaken during the day, because you're disturbed by something outside of you, say that again. And see if you don't start finding power to love the unlovely, to tolerate the intolerable, to be kinder than you feel like being. To start growing in the tangible reality of this power to be kinder. Does that make sense? I got to be reminded. Okay. The spiritual life is not a theory. Why did I suggest you try that prayer? Because the spiritual life is not a theory. It says here that we have to live it. Notice it doesn't say we have to work it because we're worth it. We love chants around here, but some of us got to grow or we go. You know what I mean? So it's better that I not get too caught up in the palm wine and just do the shit I got to do. Okay. Okay. Unless one's family expresses a desire to live upon spiritual principles, we think we ought not urge them. We should not talk incessantly to them about spiritual matters. They will change in time. So claim that promise. And you will talk incessantly about spiritual matters as you start to grow in the Spirit, because that's what we do. So if you see someone talking incessantly, don't criticize them, engage them, and move on. But the fact of the matter is that we're more effective when they see it first and ask than when we're telling them all about it. Okay? Our behavior will convince them more than our words. So don't take my word for it, take theirs. How many of you have had someone come up to you, I don't know what you've been doing, but you need to keep doing it? Because I've seen a change in you. That's my chance to honor the third step. Okay. We must remember that 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anyone. There may be some wrongs we can never fully right. We don't worry about them if we can honestly say to ourselves that we would right them if we could. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter, and it may be a valid reason for postponement in some cases, but we don't delay if it can be avoided. So guys, that's all between you and the Creator you've been introduced to. You either do it or you don't. You either need to or you don't. I mean, all of that is now, you're consciously moving in and asking for guidance and direction. I tell you this because I had a guy, I've told this story before, many of you have heard it. When I first came around a lot of years ago, there was a guy in Phoenix named Black Wally, and he did a lot of stuff. He took fledglings like me, he took me to meetings I wouldn't get to go to otherwise, and he took me to do all kinds of stuff, and he would go to the jails with me and all that stuff. And then I just kind of flew off the handle, and I really felt bad years later when I came back, because I wanted to go tell him I really appreciated all that mentoring when I was trying to get this thing early on, and he had already passed. But I claimed this promise, and one day I'm down in the courtyard at a halfway house downtown, and I'm sitting across the table from this young man, and as I'm going through the inventory with him, I discover I'm with Wally's grandson. Wow. So, we should be sensible, tactful, considerate, and humble without being servile and scraping. As God's people, we stand on our feet, we don't crawl before anyone. So here's the next set of promises, these are the 9th step promises. Those of us that understand why we wish they hadn't put them on the wall, because people that don't do the program don't understand that those are states of being. And so it's part of my spiritual fitness. It's a guide. If I'm experiencing these or not experiencing these things, I know there's something wrong with my spiritual status. Does it make sense? So it's important to know that this is a level of consciousness that these are real, these states of being. So it says if we're painstaking about this phase of our development, so what phase? wherever we are, because of the all-inclusive nature of the steps, because 12 is the big amends. So you may not have a lot of these experiences until you're taking someone else through their steps. But that doesn't mean you didn't get the promise of the fourth step. You just got it once you offered that power to someone else. How many of you took someone through a fifth step and got a real powerful flow of the Spirit and weren't even sure what the hell had happened? Okay, when that happens, now you know. Now you're experiencing what they promised in 5, but you're already through 12, and now you've gone through a 3 or a 4, right? Okay. So, if we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. So, new means what? New. So it's not just freedom from chemical, although that was unfamiliar, it was not new. Right? So this is, I ask for freedom from the bondage of self. So I'm getting free of the thoughts of me that limit me. So I'm free to be a better version of me. Does that make sense? Okay? We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. Why?
Be helpful.
I'm starting to see where those experiences I went through can be useful to help a brother or sister going through a similar experience. Yes? Okay? Can you see how those are all states of being? We'll comprehend the word serenity and know peace. How do you comprehend serenity? You'd have to experience it, because it's kind of an absence of conflict. The same thing with peace. To know peace, the absence of conflict in my thought life. To know that, I'd have to experience an absence. How many of you know what I'm talking about? The absence of conflict in our thought life is a rarity. But we've experienced it, yes? Yes. Okay. Okay. No matter how far down the scale we've gone, we'll see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness will disappear. Self-pity will disappear. We'll lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We talked about that and how that happens, yes? Yes. And we'll intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Do you understand? Intuitively is another one of the names we call God. How many of you knew exactly how to do something and gave no thought to it, but you don't know why you knew exactly how to do it? Okay. Okay, next week we'll look at, everyone's got to go, and we're at the time, so we'll come back next week, we'll look at 10 and 11. All right.